Hello, everyone. Welcome to the December 20th meeting of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I hope everyone had a chance to read over the meeting notes. And if they look good to everyone, can I have a motion to approve the minutes from last meeting? I see Ms. Yeager and Ms. Schmitz as a second. So our first agenda item is reports from the subcommittee, and we'll go in alphabetical order. So we'll start with the Communications Committee.
I don't know which one of us wants to talk, but the Communications Subcommittee met. All of my days are blending together. I think last Wednesday. Does that sound about right?
I think so, yeah.
Okay. We talked about a couple of things. We talked about the talking points that have been distributed to the school principals and how that's been fairly successful. And then the second thing we talked about was the community town halls that have been, I think that one has already occurred, and then there's one or two scheduled in the future. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Pinchonette, at the Gilliland Town Library, where we hope to have better community, engagement on this issue, not just in the school environment, but in the broader community as a whole. I'm sure I left things out.
Does anyone have anything to add or any questions? Okay. The next committee is community engagement.
I can hop in and do this one just because it's a little bit layered, and I think there's a good launch pad with what you mentioned, Rebecca, in terms of the community town halls. First, I'd want to give Lewis a shout out for creating a very, very fancy title that was a huge hit for members who were at the meeting last month. So DEI Fireside Chats, patent is pending. So we're getting the trademark paperwork filed. I'm not the one filing it, but we'll see about that. And so it actually is something that we think is going to go really, really well. The first one, as Rebecca pointed out, was really great. And the hope is that we can use our meeting in January to be able to create a schedule of them throughout the remainder of this year. And this school year, I mean, not 2022. And sorry, that was a low hanging fruit of a joke I had to. But we'll use that time to be able to get a schedule sent out, and then we can. I spoke with Patrice earlier, and just in terms of our website, where we have our multicultural observances and things of that nature. We can also get these dates put out there for folks, and then we can also we'll partner with communications to be able to make sure that community members do know that this is happening. One of the ways that the engagement committee has been doing that is through the standing membership on PTAs, which has been a very important thing and something that I'm definitely happy that we're able to see continue. Now, I do want to mention, and this is something I've heard feedback from some members of the committee, some community members, and just people in between, that we were thinking about doing one tomorrow evening. But just with the business and how packed people's schedules are, we're going to hold off on that one. And then what we'll do is we'll build from January on. Also, just making sure we have enough time to communicate to everyone so folks are on the same page with that.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Yeah, Dr. Wiles.
I just want to say that we'll be sending out a communication to families tomorrow, and we give a heads up about watch for specific notice about your fireside chats. So we'll get the beginning of the word out starting tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. Our next committee is the research subcommittee.
All right. Thank you. We met last week as the research committee, and
We happen to have Nick Harris on our committee, who's a high school psychologist and also an executive board member for the New York Association of School Psychologists. So I did miss the last DEI meeting, so I'm not sure if you talked about this already, but many of the members of the research subcommittee were calling schools in the area and asking questions about where they're at with the diversity, equity, and inclusion programming. So then Nick offered, because he's on the board for the New York State School Psychologists, to use those contacts to reach a broader number of school districts across the state. So we took a look at a form that he had started with what types of questions we want to ask, trying to find that perfect balance of getting as much information as we can without it being too long of a form so that people will actually do it, and making sure that the questions are phrased in a way that we're actually getting the information that we want. So one of the questions that we spent some time on was asking if they're doing any audits, whether they're internal, external, what that looks like, and what steps they plan to take. And then, I think the goal is not only getting a lot of information, but also, making those connections with schools, so that hopefully we can partner with them and share ideas.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Our last subcommittee that we'll hear from is the Student Voice Committee.
Hey, so we had met 2 Mondays ago. It's a busy season. We had a fairly small turnout, which fit nicely with talking about how to encourage more students to join the Student Voice Committee. So Matt assigned himself the task of creating a flyer advertising the committee, which would have a QR code and kind of envision some videos of students talking about how important it is to have their voice heard, descriptions of how often we meet, that we're virtual. We had one new student member who did make it to join us, so we kind of grilled them for what they saw as the purpose of being part of a committee like that. So I think that was a good use of that time. So we're going to move forward with trying to get some more folks to join. We did talk a little bit about some follow-up on the events at the high school and how middle schoolers are aware of those events and some of the Instagram that happened after the fact, making sure that social media isn't the only way that they're getting their information and that they can rely on the adults to provide accurate information. I think that was pretty much everything we talked about. Thank you.
So if no one else has anything to add or to say, we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is the DEI in action update, which will be done by Mr. P.
Thank you very much, Maxine. So there has been so much happening with DEI in action. And I just want to preface by saying I will not be able to capture it all in this small sampling right now. So if there's something that's being left out, please note that this is not the totality of things that are happening across the district, rather just some examples of things. So I'll start at the elementary level, and I want to share, I try to keep things macro sometimes, but this one I want to give a deep dive into a specific class. I won't go into the building teacher because things like this are happening widespread. But even in terms of different holiday celebrations that have happened across the month of December, this was in a kindergarten class where the teacher created a system of passports for different students where it was a really, really cool and engaging activity for them. They would even go and look at the screen and see a plane where they would all get on their plane together and go to the next destination where they would see videos and then also do interactive things and play with manipulatives for how people would engage in their different cultural celebrations throughout this time. And, that is just one small sampling of what I was seeing a lot of across the board in our elementary buildings. I think that, staff have really done and put forth a lot of effort in terms of trying to make sure that while yes, obviously Christmas exists and is not just a holiday represents the dominant culture of this area. It's also a big commercial day. There are so many other celebrations happening, and there are also many folks who celebrate in a variety of different ways. So making sure that it's not a single story being told, because that's really the move that we wanted to emphasize there. And kind of building from that, there are two different things I'll share at the middle level. One, I was able to meet with a couple of different members of house teams, and particularly alongside social workers. So Chris, please feel free to chime in at any point. There's really going to be building-wide work, doing character ed, and actually coming up even in January, there's already been planning and work for a celebration happening with a lot of the P2 work that's been going on. And there's been phenomenal stuff happening in the building, even in this past week, where there's been just a resurgence of good and engaging school spirit, door decorating, and it feels happy. Is probably the best way I can put it. Would you agree with that? Ms. Rogers, just it feels happy. It's not things or everything's perfect, but there's just a lot of joy in the building, and I think a sense of student agency that's really being physically seen in the halls. Whether it's through students or the doors themselves. Something I wanted to share at the high school level that's been going on. So one, I want to just kind of give a small shout out to the students who have been doing the work with the anti-hate rally. They've already been engaging and planning on how to bring some work district-wide, and have been thinking about ways where they might be, doing presentations at each of the different levels. And that obviously is no small undertaking. And that's why I just think it's essential to see whatever ways that they may need support down the line for us to help lend a hand with that. The other thing has been the continuation of student focus group meetings that we've been doing now over the past 2 months. So we've met with dozens of students in a small group setting where we are hearing their stories and gaining feedback as a way that high school staff can better support the wide range of learners that we have. And we're seeing ways that we can move forward with things, yes, at the high school level, but really K-12 with that. And I think just from, having the window into each of these different student focus groups, a resounding thing that I've been hearing is that students appreciate having a space to be heard and having a platform to be able to speak. And I think that that's definitely something that we are looking to continue them and reach more and more folks coming after the break. So that's a quick snapshot of just some of the types of things that have been happening, but this has definitely been an action-packed month where there's good work happening everywhere.
Thank you, Mr. P. Our next thing is the equity audit update, which is going to be with Mr. Pinchnot and Dr. Wiles.
Matt, I'll start and you can fill in the blanks because I know you've recently had a nice chat with Natalie. But on December 5th, we had our most recent Equity Institute staff development for our equity team members. And the bulk of that day was really spent on looking deeply into our data to see how our school buildings and the subpopulations within our school buildings are doing on a variety of measures. So that was a very hands-on look and leading to the next step of the work of those equity teams, which is to continue looking at data and then start developing their action plans that will guide our building level action over the next several years. So that was a very powerful day. And then our next step coming up is another data gathering set of experiences when we're going to be hosting our focus groups. And that'll be right after we get back from the break. And this is an opportunity for small groups of faculty in one group, students in another, and community members, parents in another, to talk about their experiences in Guilderland as another data point to inform our action plans going forward. And I know Matt had the chance to speak with Natalie, I think last week. I've lost track of the time, to talk about a little bit of the logistics. So Matt, I'll defer to you if there are other parts of that discussion that the committee should be aware of.
Thank you. Yeah, so Natalie and we spoke last Friday and kind of walked through some of the plannings of stuff for focus groups. So a few things that I think are definitely relevant for everyone here to be aware of, and is the structure of them, what they'll look like. I want to emphasize a point Dr. Wiles made about how there's going to be different groups for each of the different categories. So for students, then for staff, and then also for community members. And DEI committee members are absolutely invited and welcome and able to be part of those focus groups. So folks who are willing and able to make it, it would be fantastic to be able to have your voice heard and to be able to share your experience with Guilderland schools. The way that things are going to be structured, it's building by building. And at the elementary level, the student portion is centered on 4th and 5th grade. Then at the middle and high levels, it's all students. For the parent and community member one, that one is going to end up being virtual, whereas the other ones are in the building. And when we were aiming for times for those and trying to pin down dates, the goal was to try to have it early evening, not so late that it's prohibitive for people being able to enter, but also not at 2:30 or before kids themselves are home. So the average times we're looking at seems to be about, it's an hour for each one for whatever group it's in. They're all an hour, and we're looking generally 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. and then a 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. one, doubling up on days. And each of the focus groups is going to be centered around 4 main questions, which are really focused on the culture and climate of the building and students' experiences in the building. Then the same would be true for staff experience in each of those buildings and that as members of the community. Then for parents and community members, it's going to be a similar thing. Your experience in the building when you've entered for any sort of student event, whether that is a concert, a play, a musical, anything in between, parent conferences, how you might interact with PTAs, what is it like being a member of a committee such as this one, and how does that play into your experience as part of the district? For parents specifically, what has your experience been like as a parent in this catchment? So those are the general types of questions for it. Then just for a logistical piece, there's not going to be a large amount of Guilderland staff there. In fact, Natalie's going to be there and then I'll be there. And the reason for this is to make sure that everything in the focus groups, people are able to speak as earnestly and honestly about it, because the goal for us is to make sure that we're hearing what we need to be able to improve, and we want to be action oriented and future oriented. So that's the general parameter of them. And the focus groups are going to be relatively small in size, not as small as the high school ones, which have been about 9 students, anywhere from about 6 to 9 students. This one, we're looking 15 with a maximum of 20. And so that's kind of the size limit that we're having. And even with that amount of people, anyone on the DEI committee who wants to be involved can be, either by, FMS in the high school encompass the entire district, or if you go to a specific building where you may have, if you're a parent and have a child who's in one of the other areas, or if you just live in a specific catchment, there's space for all of us to be engaged in that kind of work. So that's the general structure of it. And we're trying to do one focus group at the elementary level in each of the buildings. And then if possible, if everything can align, perhaps 2 at the middle level and then 3 at the high school level, just in proportion with the number of students in each building. So that's what that aspect is going to look like. And the focus groups are going to function as another data point alongside a lot of the quantitative data that we're going to be using for the equity action plans, alongside the equity walks that happened back in November. So all those are building as blocks that we can use to inform our practice moving forward. That was a lot of information, but I just wanted to make sure that everyone at least, knows what's going on.
Does anyone have any questions or comments for Dr. Wiles or Mr. P? Yeah, Elizabeth.
Yeah, I have a question for Dr. Wiles. You mentioned that the different groups of students were kind of being tracked in terms of their experiences in certain areas, like data about them, you said. And I just wondered what kind of data was looked at with regard to different groups?
I don't think I said today that they were being tracked.
But I mean, you guys looked at it, you examined it.
They looked at a variety of data, a lot of student achievement data, and they looked at it by subgroups. I think that's what, if I wasn't clear about that, I'm sorry. So we have a new slew of state assessment data, which we all recognize is just a data point, but it is pretty available to us, and it's we're able to look at it by total population, girls, boys, students who are economically disadvantaged, students with disabilities, in race. So I think a lot of the time was spent that day looking at that kind of data. But we also have in our repository the ability to look at other kinds of quantitative data, including what are the class compositions of AP courses, of our special education programs. We have data that looks at who is being suspended. We have all of those kinds of things. And so Natalie will be helping us parse through all of that as part of the building equity walks. So we had the teams who did the qualitative experience of walking through the buildings. And then she's also asked us to provide to her through our Mike Bastian, who's our information coordinator, all of that kind of quantitative data. So we can also look at questions like, do all students have equal access to advanced courses? Is there a disproportionate number of students who are economically disadvantaged who, fill in the blank? So the whole idea is really to not only look at our student population as a whole, but in particular our subgroups, because that's really where this work lives and breathes.
All right, our next agenda item is our main discussion of the meeting, which is the discussion of possible and how we would do this DEI professional development for our school resource officer. If someone would like to start by just giving some background information or helpful information that's related to our food for thought, I think that would be helpful to start off our discussion.
I can jump in, Maxine. So the last, I think, 2 board meetings, there was discussion about having adding another SRO, school resource officer to the school district. And so I think we're going to try and pilot like a program with another SRO with the middle school for the remaining part of the school year. And people were having discussion about what kind of training or PD there is available for school resource officers. And so far, I don't think there was much that anybody found. And so we're just bringing it, I think, to this group as well, in case people knew of something or had heard about something that could be helpful in that area.
I can jump in further and then defer the raised hands to say that, part of the discussion was, and I think a willingness on the part of our SRO and potentially our second SRO to fully participate in all of the professional development we offer to our regular staff around DEI. So that's a piece of the puzzle that I just want to make sure is been offered and accepted, and we will pursue.
Go ahead, Ms. Schmitz.
Have we spoken with the police department about what training they offer? Officers go through extensive training and the academy and things like that. So have we already spoken to them about what the department is providing to them?
I'll jump in and then others can help. Yes, we have had several conversations with the Guilderland Police Department, and Chief Dan McNally shared the list of those areas of training that are required for all police officers, and then a bit of specificity around the SRO position. And I believe the list included, and I don't have it in front of me, I should have brought it, some anti-bias kind of training, but it wasn't, there wasn't more than that was explicit to DEI. So I think we might need to do a little bit additional work. And the only other thing I'll throw in here is that, I spoke with my colleagues, other superintendents in the area who also have SROs within their organizations. And they made the same point that I did a minute or two ago about having the SROs participate in the district offerings for professional development. And the last tidbit I'll share is about a month or two ago, the superintendents met with representatives from law enforcement from, all of the towns and counties for all the communities in the Capital Region District BOCES. And one of the outcomes of that was to create a regularly scheduled, I don't know if it'll be monthly, session for all of our SROs to get together to share best practices, to talk about common challenges, and that would be a terrific forum to do some DEI training with everybody all together. So I'm going to stop talking.
Yeah, Elizabeth.
Speaking of that, do we know how many schools in the area in the area, like the area that you just described, Marie? Do we know how many school districts have a DEI consultant? Like Mr. Pinchinat.
Yeah, why don't you take that since you know them well?
I can speak to colleagues that we have in this, I should say that I have in the Suburban Council. So Niskuna has someone in my role. North Colony has 2 people in my role. There is someone else at Bethlehem. We also, in our Capital Region BOCES group, there's people who are doing this work, but maybe not necessarily in this title. Schenectady has someone in this role. And across the Capital Region, everyone has a representative that will go to our equity officers meeting. Sometimes, though, it is people wearing 2 hats. And to that end, there is someone doing all that kind of work in each one of the different places, whether they are a suburban school, rural, or urban, just throughout this entire BOCES system. Specifically in regards to folks who have done training for SROs. None of my colleagues that I've been in immediate contact have done that. So that is something where I think definitely anything that people can offer, and how the wider we can cast our net and the more perspectives we can bring in, the better. My impression, really, even just from the initial board meeting where this was brought up, was that folks were willing and would be interested in doing something like this. So I don't think, this is my perception, that the hurdle is to get folks on board with doing some sort of a training or workshop. I think it's a matter of what would that look like, how would that be structured? Is this something that we would do through the school, through someone outside? Those kinds of questions.
It's Blanca and then Miss Schmitz.
Thank you. So yes, I was just going to echo what Marie said and Matt a little bit. There doesn't seem to be a DEI component to the certification for SROs. It is a topic that is touched upon, as part of the certification, but not an area of focus and not its own additional training. And sorry, I'm out of breath. I just ran across the room. I kind of see it as an opportunity because I haven't found anything elsewhere that is specific to SROs. It's an opportunity for this committee to be involved or to highlight things I think that they would like covered in said training. I really feel like, just like Matt's position, we were one of the first to have this position. And so we could be one of the first that has this partnership with the police department and develops a training or kind of puts out there what they think is important, an outline or bullet list of sorts that highlights things that we think are important. So just my 2 cents.
And then Miss Schmitz.
I think it's an excellent idea to provide the training for the SROs, in that a school community is a community within the town. It is different than being out, working a case at Crossgates Mall or things like that. But on that same token, would it be possible to expand our view and think about offering not just the SROs, but if we can come up with some kind of a training about, dignity and inclusion and equity, and being able to offer it to officers who will also be responding to school things that happen. It's not just a school resource officer responding. It's going to be officers who are working that shift when something happens. And, that's a big thing that we hear in communities is officers were not sensitive to something that happened. So I would really like to look at, can we expand that a little bit to not just the SROs, but to the officers who will be coming into our schools.
Yeah, Miss Parker.
I did just want to add that I consider this an opportunity for the partnership and with the police department, and that they did vocalize an interest in working with us on this. So I want to echo what Marie said, because honestly, I've come across articles about other school districts that requested SRO training in the area of DEI, and the police departments refused. So I think we have a unique, potential partnership here, and we should sort of carpe diem.
Yeah, Miss Butterfield.
Hi. So I know Blanca did a little research on her own, but I wonder if the research committee could look beyond the Capital District if other school districts have an SRO diversity training, like across the country. Because I feel like there really must be, I would think there would be something somewhere. Maybe we just haven't discovered it yet.
Miss Young.
Yeah, thank you. I'm on the research subcommittee, and I was thinking that same thing. Like, I think that would be a great thing to start looking into. And, you know, as people are talking to, I'm going through emails. I'm a school counselor as well. And so I kind of get blasted with emails for professional development. There have been a couple coming through that I can look into a little bit more specifically about SROs. So I'll dig through some of those as well and see if they might be appropriate for our area. And, you know, and hearing about the focus groups that are coming up too, I think that that'll be a huge piece of adding those comments in to whatever the training is.
And then it's Ms. Kaplan and Ms. Hernandez. So Ms. Kaplan.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, so I was going to echo exactly what Carla said. So I definitely think that's something we could look into. And I know that one thing we were trying to decide, and Carla touched on this, was just trying to make sure that we don't overwhelm our Google form, but I definitely think that's one that should be in there. And similar, I've also been looking into to what extent the SROs will have to go try some training and considerations, because there's so much out there of, sadly, SROs who haven't been trained, and the negative effects of an effort to try to increase safety sometimes has gone the other direction without DEI training. So I definitely think there's some very valid ideas there. And then to see what districts are doing, not only if they have SROs, but the trainings that they go through, and then what types of trainings that are offered, if it's whether is within the district or external trainings. So is that something that Progression Partners would also offer, weigh in as well, as with some things that they will recommend when they come up with their reports and things like that? Is that a category at this point?
Mr. P, do you have a response to that?
Thank you, and sorry for jumping the line, but I can definitely ask about that. That seems like a reasonable thing for us to check in about. I don't know that is just a tacit part of the plans related to SRs, but I think that it's a reasonable thing for us to be able to bring up and see further feedback, just because they've worked with a lot of different districts. So I'll add that on my list of things to follow up with them about.
And next is Ms. Hernandez.
All right, so a couple of things. I think Ms. Schmitz, you hit it right on the head in terms of integration. I think that it would be a very good idea to ensure that there's a cohesive partnership. Having done implicit bias training for Albany City police officers myself, it is very difficult, very, very difficult work. It is not something for the faint of heart, because what we also have to understand is that there has to be integration into the policing culture. And what I mean by that is that it has to not just be that, okay, the SRO is in the school district and your behavior in the school district is going to be one, but that leadership in the police organization is also championing this work, because it is a chain of command. Chain of command rules. It's not necessarily the type of organization, and Ms. Schmitz, you could speak to this way better than I can. It's not necessarily the hierarchical organizations that we are used to. And we have to be cognizant of that. And that is one of the difficult areas in doing training, because it's not just simply training, right? It's also cultural shift, and it's breaking from certain standards potentially that perpetuate some of these things. So we have to be very collaborative, super collaborative in the discussions. It's not just throwing an SRO into training. It's really, really having conversations with the police department about the values, the expectations, what their expectations are, what kinds of trainings they're already getting, and us understanding what their procedures are in order to complement, for our trainings to complement that. and for there also to not be breaches of contract. Those are things that we are not considering, right? So there are particular contracts and things that are in union situations that are also considerations when it comes to training, when it comes to hours, when it comes to overtime. That if you want somebody to come in and do extra hours of training, what does that mean? Who's paying for that? What does that? There are a lot of moving parts to this situation. So, and I'm not saying that to be a Debbie Downer. I'm the reason why I'm saying that is because I think it's important to have nuanced conversations, and make sure that you know both sides are being served within the parameters that have been designated um, for each. So I just kind of wanted to bring up those specific points because it's not just as easy as saying, oh, we have to train um, officers. Also being cognizant of the climate that we're in right now, and views of police officers and all of those things become touchy when you are putting folks together in trainings, especially diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings that are requiring for folks to be vulnerable and honest about how they feel and their experiences. That is very, very difficult when you are beholden to organizations that folks feel aren't doing enough. The potential of really engaging in that training might be limited, just from the fact that the climate is what it is, the perception is what it is, and you are trying to make sure that you represent your organization in the best way possible. So that may mean that you're not going to delve deeply into, oh, well, we could do this better or we could do that better. And a lot of these conversations go there. So these are the tricky parts of this. But again, I just want, and I think that it is really, really important and wonderful that Guilderland Police Department is open to have these conversations, but these are nuanced. And we are very new as Guilderland in terms of delving into these topics ourselves. I'm just thinking 2020, inception of this committee, right? So there is skill set and trained professionals that need to be involved in operationalizing DEI in terms of the police officer presence. And I think that we're kind of building the plane as we fly it, which means that there is ample potential for harm. And we just want to mitigate that and be honest and cognizant of that. So I'll shut up now. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Ms. Mayer and then Ms. Schmitz.
No, those were great points to decide. I feel that that with SROs, I think that SROs will tend to self-select when they say, okay, I want to go work in the school. The people that do that are likely, I think, to be people that are willing to engage and to be open because they've chosen that job. They're not just, so they know that they're getting into dealing with, a diverse group of people, young people, and they have some idea, I think, of the challenges that they'll be facing there. So plus we know that those people will definitely be in the school where we don't know about other officers whether they'll be there at all ever or not. So and like Tibisai said, the idea that people need to be vulnerable in taking any kind of DEI training. I think it would make sense to kind of start by thinking about the SROs. I like that idea about the area SROs, getting people together so they could maybe share stories with each other, and kind of starting small and seeing how it goes. Another good point about that would be that they could take what they've learned, back to the department and tell other officers about it, and kind of like get a little bit of buy-in from other officers. Like tell them what's going on and what they're learning, and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, okay, well that doesn't sound so bad," you know, as a way of introducing the ideas to people in the force. So to me, it would make sense to start with SROs rather than the whole force, because we don't know what we're doing yet either. For also, haven't figured it out yet. So starting with a small group is maybe good in a lot of ways.
And then Ms. Schmitz.
I think one of the concerns I have when I talk about the entire force is the fact that if we have two SROs, we have one primarily at the high school or doing the DARE program in the elementaries, and you have one at middle school. If an incident occurs, those aren't the only officers that are going to be there. There are going to be other officers responding. And I'm sure, Dr. Wiles has set parameters of what the district expects from the SROs. And I think, the district has every right to say, this is what we expect in whatever circumstances that occur. And DEI being a very strong part of that. We are a very diverse community, and the officers have to be responsive to that and to those differences. So, I hear what you're saying about just starting with SROs, and police culture is different. And I hear what you say about, going back to the station and talking. And that's a great idea, but it's probably not going to happen. Officers work all different shifts and they don't see everybody. And so, to share those messages, and as you said, you talk about overtime, you're talking about mandatory training. It's a whole different culture that has to be addressed. So I would like to see us expand. I agree. Maybe start with the SROs in the capital region, maybe a collaborative thing with people who, have the same positions as Matt, like Matt does, to put something together, get trained educators in there to work with them. But I really think we had to see the big picture. When you listen about incidents in schools, it's not one officer. It's multiple officers who respond. And it has a huge impact on our overall community that we can really be the leaders in to try and help, mitigate and avoid so many things that have happened in other places. So I would just like to really be open to looking into expanding it. And again, like I said, I'm sure Dr. Wiles has parameters that, the district has set and what our expectations are of school resource officers, especially in this area.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're going to have to start wrapping up the conversation so we can have enough time for our learning component. So, if no one else has any comments, this week's reading assignment we're still working on A Place to Belong by Amber O'Neill Johnston. And our reading assignment was chapters 5 through 6. And that will be led by, I believe it's Mr. P. So take it away.
All right, thank you. And also, even just as we're getting to this last part of the agenda, definitely thank you so much, Maxie, for stepping up this month. You've done a really fantastic job. So definitely all the flowers to you. Looking into the two different chapters, we'll start off with chapter 5. And the first question that I wanted to just open up to the group to see what we what we wanted to get into, it was the second question. I do think that it is important, what are literary windows, but I think just for time's sake, which types of windows do you think your children need more of and why? And this can be related specifically if you are a parent to your own children. But I think I feel comfortable speaking for all of us that we see the district as they are our children. So we'll start off with Tibisai. Go ahead.
Definitely for me, the biggest difference in my upbringing, full disclosure, growing up in poverty, and my children, are the fact that there are still things that stun them. Like I was talking to them about taking the bus, and my son's like, "People don't have cars," and I'm like, "Yeah, there are people who don't have cars," and like just social class. I didn't really realize while I lived in poverty, my exposure to people from diverse classes was a lot wider and bigger than living in a suburban environment. And for me, the windows that I really want my children to look into more are understanding that not everybody, lives in the ways that we do, that there are um, communities and folks that are in poverty. There are ways for us to give back. I've done community service work with my daughter at the Ronald McDonald House, and we got there with my sorority and made this great feast, for that dinner for everyone that lived in the Ronald McDonald House in Albany for that evening, and it was a great experience. And I just think that volunteerism and commitment to community. I also grew up going to Catholic schools and being more involved in religious organizations as a young person that has kind of dwindled away as an adult. I haven't really found a spiritual community in the capital region that I've been connected to necessarily. And I would like to figure out how to fill in those gaps for my children, like giving them windows into how different folks live, but also giving them windows into what they can do to be a part of a giving community, and being able to help and support. And I think that that's a little bit more hidden in Guilderland. It's there, but it's not as easily visible.
Thank you. I think that's a very powerful point, and that really does speak to the very necessity of a window, right? So it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, but it's what are we seeing? What about other folks? What kind of windows do we feel like we need, that you feel our children need? Go ahead, Mary.
I guess I would just like to piggyback on what she said, and looking at our community and the community our children live in, is that we are in many ways a privileged community, but we also have people who have great need, and to be able to look at the big picture of our, whether it be our school or our town. I know with my own children, having them recognize that everyone was not as advantaged as they were, and going on to the other hand and saying, how can I make it better for those who don't have as much as I do? So I think that sense of recognizing um, that there are people of poverty right around you, and then going a little further and saying, how can I make that better in my community?
Thank you. Nina?
Yeah, I think along the same lines. I think growing up like near New York City, I saw a lot more. And when I say diversity, I mean of all sorts, just a more kind of worldly viewpoint. And I think a lot of students in this area in general don't have that same viewpoint. And I think maybe even just global understanding of, the world and what it means to be a global citizen. I think those are things that would also be good vantage points for the kids to be able to connect with those in our community, but also beyond. I think that this area could definitely benefit from that type of teaching.
Yeah, I agree very much with that. Actually, part of the well, it's not irony, but I was talking with a few folks in district office about that today. Um, just seeing beyond the capital region. And I spoke about this last year, but when I came back from one of the EF tours, a thing that really stood out to me was some of the ways that students were engaging with each other surrounding the world. And a setting, we were getting gelato in Italy. I know I have rough days sometimes, everyone. And so as we're getting this, one of the students just looked at me and they were like, you know, it's really hitting me hard that here we are in another country and we're all speaking English. We go into a store and we expect to be able to order in English, and we ask them questions about this, about the menu. We don't read Italian, and yet what we'll hear sometimes is, you're in America, speak English, when America actually doesn't have a national language. And seeing that kind of play out, I think travel is such an important part of being able to broaden our perspectives. And it doesn't mean that you have to go, across the Atlantic, but I think even just going beyond your immediate area and seeing other parts of the world has a really good impact. But just what you were saying, it just kind of resonated with the conversation I had just a few hours ago. Chris, go ahead, and then Tibisai.
I was thinking as we were speaking about people with different socioeconomic advantages, and also the contributions of people maybe with different disabilities. I don't think our students often see our classmates and other students who have disabilities as having much to contribute, because sometimes they're not in the regular classroom. They're just kind of, they're part of the time. And then when I was thinking about that, I was thinking about the histories of all different cultures and how we really study the contributions mostly of European white people, and not people who are neurodiverse, not the contributions of Native Americans, not I mean, I was doing some looking in for the Alliance and finding contributions of people from like Afghanistan and India and other areas that I know I have membership that students are from those cultures. And I was blown away about my own complete lack of knowledge about, oh, wow, that person did this amazing thing for science and I had no idea. So I think just generally when we learn about any subject, looking more at how diverse people have contributed in that subject and not just the history of European people, European able-bodied people, wealthy European able-bodied people creating our history, but all of these other contributing groups.
Yeah, thank you. And a line that sticks out to me from a student who is a senior right now, and they said this a couple of years back. In reference to, this is not a Gilderland thing, but thinking broadly in the state in terms of what's reflected on the regions. They were like, how can I, from learning, in focusing on just European history, know enough about the entire world's history to be able to ace the Regents exam? And I think that speaks to the stories that we have privileged. And each time you add another layer, in a sense, that should be limiting the scope of who we're doing. But it didn't necessarily narrow the scope of what figures we study in history. And I think that speaks volumes. Tibisai, and then Katie. Oh, you're muted still.
I put my hand down, but I didn't turn on my mic. See, I was also would be remiss to mention humble volunteerism. And what I mean by that is not thinking that you are responsible for fixing people's problems, right? We're not when I was in poverty, I didn't know I was in poverty. I was very happy. The things that I had, I was very grateful for. And I was not thinking, you know, oh, the world, or I need these organizations to do something for me. No, we stood in a welfare line and we were lucky to be able to get food. Absolutely. But I didn't see that as a deficit, right? I didn't learn about that as a deficit until somebody said, oh, you get food stamps? And I'm like, yeah, I get food stamps and I get to go get a Snickers with my food stamps. So like, right. Like I was very much like that person who did not see it as a problem or an issue because I was just happy that we had food. And back in the day, it was brown. The food stamps were brown money. Anyway, I digress. My point is this: making sure that in that process of opening windows, I think about this a lot with my kids. I don't want to put a burden on them to think that they have to fix other people's problems. I want them to learn how to collaborate with folks, how to ask what people need in order to be responsive to people's needs and not just look at something from this blanket stereotyped perspective and angle and think, oh, I know what they need with my suburban identity. They need all the stuff I need. No, they don't, right? So just I think sometimes we're so eager, and I think that's an American culture thing, which I think is fantastic, but can also put us in a savior complex place that people then start to resent. So I really feel like it's important to teach kids how to assess where they can be helpful, but also look at the strengths of a community. And Matt, there's a book on the list that I put together that kind of talks to that, but whenever you're ready.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Katie?
I appreciate the points everyone's making. Excellent, what you just shared, but also the including of accomplishments of people with disabilities was another great piece added in. And I just wanted to go back to what Mary had added, that when Caring Closet was first coming into our schools, one of the things that they kept the organization was commenting on is how there were a lot of students who were surprised when this resource was becoming available, that there was a need in our community for those resources to be available to students. So that was just something that stood out to me when they presented, how often students were surprised that someone would need some help with some of those personal care items and wouldn't just have them available to them. That it really pointed out to me that one of those windows is that we really need to make our students understand that there are a wide variety of needs across the district.
Absolutely. And thank you. Yeah. Yes, I just agree. I agree completely. And that leads us very much into the next question that we'll have for chapter 5. And then after that, we'll go into chapter 6. I actually couldn't have set it up any better myself, but it's what is the issue with the single story? And what can we do to prevent the proliferation of the single story within our homes? So we can think about this from the context, if you are someone who's a Guilder employee, in your classroom, in your space, in your office, whatever that may look like. But also for all of us, how do we stop that from happening at our home level and then in our own work? And I'll add a little bit more into this than I typically might. But this is something that has centered itself and emerged and reemerged in our work with progression partners, the danger of a single story. And if you haven't seen the TED Talk related to the danger of a single story, I definitely would recommend for everyone to take a look at it. But it absolutely applies to the conversation that we've been having, as well as something that Maxine actually mentioned in the beginning of this year. which is, and sorry for putting you on the spot, you don't have to respond back to it, but it was just making sure that exactly what Tibisai said, the things that we're doing, they're meeting the needs that exist within our student body. So rather than us, supposing that students need or want X, Y, and Z, okay, let's hear from students. It's the reason why we're doing the focus groups. It's the reason why we have the student voice subcommittee here. And I say that not to say that we're perfect, but to say that it's clear that that needs to happen. And I wonder what other blinders we may have with the single story. Yeah, go ahead, Tibisai.
What's interesting to me is the extremes that a single story can create, right? Not just with a privileged lens of, oh, this is all that I know and I'm in this bubble, but then also the other side of things of you need to be perfect in your DEI execution. Make no mistakes, give no grace, right? How could you not know about XYZ? How dare you not understand implicit bias in 2022? I think the outrage and the ignorance are becoming mirrors of each other that prevent people from having nuanced conversations that center their humanity and the fact that they're going to make mistakes. Not willful mistakes, human mistakes. And that is what then turns certain people off from even having an understanding, because, oh, well, if you go ask XYZ person, they're going to be outraged that you even have this question in your mind, because you're supposed to be so evolved and so excellent in your thinking already that you should know all this stuff. The single story of who we should be and this version of perfection that some people have outrage around why we're all not there yet, even though we just started talking about some of these topics, versus the willful ignorance and the lack of wanting to see outside of your worldview. I think those two single stories, those two polars, are causing a lot of harm to a lot of people right now and making it really difficult to have places of compromise and places where we can get better. Just a quick story. I had a colleague that said to me, I don't want to make excuses for people. And I said, okay, because in the past, their point was, in the past, people made excuses for people and for organizations, and we didn't get as far as we needed to get. And I said, but you and I are here. You and I are here, and we weren't here before. So some progress has been made. So there has to be a balance to these conversations and not a demonizing or a shaming. I hate the blame, shame, guilt game. And I think we need to start understanding that we're all going through a level of pain. We just have to figure out how to talk about it in ways that create productive and innovative solutions to the systems that weren't created by us.
I totally agree with that. I actually think one of the most dangerous things that we can do is let ourselves think that we know everything as it pertains to DEI. Again, earlier today with some folks in district office and really throughout the day with different colleagues, the reality is there are going to be things 10 years or 15 years from now, we might even look back in some of our conversations that we're having here where we are being DEI practitioners and we're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I said this. I can't believe that was the way I was viewing this. And that should be where we go, because the ideal is that we're going to keep on growing and learning, not that we're going to have the spot where, okay, we've obtained and now we can kick our feet up. That's just not reality, and that's not how progress works. And so I think that that's super important. Would anyone else like to speak to that idea too? A single story, or what we can do to prevent the proliferation of a single story in our space? Yeah, Maxine, go ahead.
I think that like the single story really closes people's minds. I think it's why people stop doing work that's really important. They don't understand how an issue can affect another group of people that is different from them. So they say, oh, it's good enough for me. So they leave that, that group stops fighting, and they leave another group of people to continue working without their support. So I think it's important to expose everyone to the different perspectives of the world, the different situations that people are in, because that greater understanding puts people on like a team rather than people competing for when they get to be done with the issue.
Yes, thanks for that. Puts people on a team. I like that. And I'll use that as a launch pad going into chapter 6, which is about, what makes a book good. And so thinking about how we're able to merge a couple of different ideas and see beyond our own neighborhood, see beyond our own community. I want us to think about this question, the concept of our own ideal libraries. What does that look like? What is it that we have on our shelves? What is it that we see reflected? Is it just one type of thing? And I'll kind of just leave it open. So yeah, how do we feel about the concept of our own ideal libraries as a way to be able to foster this? If you don't have a person to converse with, books are always there. Nina, go ahead.
I mean, I guess just from the standpoint that, it's important that we want to involve our families and our children, into their culture and their own identities, but also to engage them with literacy. So there's a lot of different values there. An opportunity to kind of extend their own cultural awareness.
Absolutely. I'll kind of partner that thought with something else that kind of emerged a little bit later. But thinking, and we don't have to answer this for our own homes, but I want us to think about it, like what percentage of diverse books in our home center on just the struggle aspect of things. I know this is a critique that early in my teaching career, probably 1, 2, someone said, I want to learn more than just the stories of our pain. And that's something that I'm consciously aware of. It's something that I didn't experience a ton of. And what's embarrassing is I had thought I was doing a good job to that point. And I was like, oh, okay then. And I don't know that I did hit the spot where it was, okay, this is the sweet spot, and now we're just doing everything in perfect balance. But to that end, I'll go and pass on, so we can just do this kind of as a quick thing. How many of us growing up, and we can use the raise hand feature for this, did have a balance of books that depicted marginalized characters, but in stories of joy and in positive settings? And if you can think of at least 2 that you had growing up, go ahead and feel free to use the raise hand feature.
I mean, I think that's a testament to the amazing librarians that our school district has. I went to Gildan Elementary, so I think it comes with a new generation of like writers that are willing to, that are like given the platform to write and willing to write about marginalized experiences, and also like the amazing librarians at our school who like find these great books to share moments with students, and it goes for all the libraries in the district.
I couldn't agree more. The libraries in the district are one of the brightest spots in our work with DEI. Truly, the librarians are fantastic. But I also think it speaks to the test of time, because we also do have other folks who did go through Gilderland and didn't have that same experience. And this goes to where it's not a knock necessarily on any individual. I started by knocking myself as a teacher. But I think that gives me hope that we're going to have progress, and that, okay, this generation missed out on that. But hopefully, the work that we're doing is impacting change in a positive way, and that it won't just be, okay, your generation kind of got that vaccine, and then the generation that follows you is going to miss that. And this goes to a point that I feel very strongly about, that DEI work is something where we don't necessarily see the seeds growing into something in 1 year, because this means that the seeds of these books were planted a decade ago, and that impact is being felt now. And I think that that is something that's critical as we evaluate, as we reevaluate, as we assess, and as we, critique our own work with this, as we critique our practice and think about ways that we want to further ourselves, and even tying it into our SRO conversation, as we continue to evaluate our practice and what are ways that we are engaging with the community. It's not something that we're going to feel like, oh, we nailed it, the first time. And I also think we have to give ourselves grace to not be frustrated if we don't see a 180 with something that's problematic just because we did a single intervention. It doesn't mean the intervention doesn't work, but systems resist change, and they do take time to change. Tipasai?
So there's this resource that speaks to this called Diverse Book Finder. And what this organization has done is analyze how communities of color are represented in books. So they have looked at the numbers, but they've also looked at the interpretations. So things like, are they central to the stories? Are do they explicitly focus on the diverse expressions of the human experience? Are there biographies featuring the life of a particular person or group of people from a historical or contemporary perspective? And they are doing this and have this up on the website live. So you can actually look at these graphs by different communities, by different communities of color. And there are people that are researching how folks are being depicted, and really what kinds of stories and narratives are out there, because media and books are the things that perpetuate the single story, right? So if you don't see yourself represented in a nuanced way, and it's always in the same way, it's always in this victim, it's always in a pain or struggle situation, then that's the only thing that you'll think your community has, instead of the resilience, the wonderful contributions, and the empowering stories. So again, I just think that we're getting into a place where we have to find a balance. You don't want to hide the fact that there were struggles and there are historical pain points that we need to reckon with, but you also don't want to reduce a group or a community just to those moments. So yeah, there are resources out there that can help us be more intentional about the things that we choose to bring into our homes, and how we create those ideal libraries.
Thank you. And kind of building off that, I want to, I'll open up the floor for final comments after this, but I wanted to just read a quote from the book because it's one of the things that stood out to me. And this is on page 108 and looking at life-giving books and just kind of what that means. So section honor your child. So as parents, we have a responsibility to guide our kids towards what we know to be best. Our maturity and experience afford us wisdom that their limited worldviews don't allow. But children are not empty vessels. They are ours, and they are also their own people. As any experienced parent will tell you, children are born with personalities, hang-ups, and gifts. They can be molded, but not altogether changed. This acknowledgement of unique personhood matters in various aspects of child rearing, and our children's literary lives are no different. And that specific part kind of just stands out to me, and it speaks to me from the lens of, as we think about the representation that we have, representation matters because our students are all different. And because, you know, even lumping two students who may be next door neighbors in a wealthy neighborhood can have extremely and radically different lives and experiences. And to see oneself reflected is validation that you exist and that your experiences are real. And so as we continue in that path, I think it's important for us to consider what we have in our own home libraries, what we have reflected in our office and school and classroom libraries, but also ways that we're able to support that to go beyond books and into other areas of our work. Does anyone have any final thoughts on this section that they wanted to share? Elizabeth?
I just wanted to say how great I thought it was, the point you made about that you thought that we should consider all the students in the district our children. I think that's a great point. Love that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I feel very, very strongly about that. I know I'm not the only one. That's really what it is. Everyone's ask any teacher and they're going to say my kids. That's what it is. So yeah, Nina, and then Katie.
I just want to say that I really like your use of the word validation. I think that really speaks to such a broad point because that's what kids need. I really like how you hone in on that idea.
Thank you. Katie?
I just wanted to mention, and I know I've sent you and I kind of emailed about this before, but Wayne White at NYSET as Director of Social Justice is doing a lot of this same work with books and stories for teachers and schools. And I know that, you know, he's always creating resources to provide to schools and teachers. So just another thought of, you know, since he's doing some of the same work is collaborating so that, you know, we can help each other with that.
Absolutely. I think that just makes sense, and he's a solid guy, and thinking about things in a meta way. I appreciate the validation. Dr. Wiles?
Well, I was just thinking about a couple things that we talked about today. One was our fireside chats at the Guilderland Public Library and books. And maybe on the evening when we do these open house fireside chats, maybe we know somebody at GPL who can coordinate maybe a display of books that capture a variety of, you know, celebrating differences and really focusing in on the stories of joy around people of color, children or people with disabilities, you know, to make it kind of a come in and chat and, oh, maybe you want to take out a book that you might not have at home.
I love that idea. I think that's...
My husband will love me for volunteering him.
Yeah, I love that. That is really, really good. I'm sure that down so I don't forget it. All right. Does anyone else have any final thoughts before we close out for today? No?
Matt, do you want me to share the document or no?
Oh, yes, please. My apologies.
Okay.
Yeah, not everyone has it, just we have it. And I'm going to share that out with the building principals and the librarians as well after the meeting's over.
Okay, I did go a little ham and create a flip magazine. So I'm gonna put that link in the chat for folks. So I just want to thank everybody who sent book recommendations. They were so great, and it was such a joy to put this together. And in it, I coordinated it because I'm a graphic person and I like to see things be pretty. So when you look at it, it's divided up by age group. So it's age appropriate. When you actually open it, you can click on the link. So you can click in the boxes on each of the books and it'll lead you right to Amazon. I wanted it to lead you to a small bookstore, but I didn't have time to do that, y'all. So the next time I'll do that. But this just goes to Amazon. So you can actually grab the book if it interests you. There's a small blurb there. And the last page of it actually has some parent resources of programs that provide free books to community members, like Dolly Parton's Imagination Library, PJ Library, which sends out free books around Jewish heritage, which I thought was pretty interesting and really cool. The Diverse Book Finder, which I mentioned to you, is there as well. Everything is clickable. So if you click on the title, it'll take you to the page and to the resource. And for those of you that sent me things a little bit later on, I will expand this and include your suggestions. I'm sorry that they came in a little late and I was trying to be fancy, but I'll definitely add. And if folks want me to continue to expand this with their suggestions, happy to do that as well. And thank you, Maxine, for saying it looks awesome. I appreciate you.
Okay. Thank you all. So in that case, we're waiting on a motion to adjourn. Rebecca, do we have a second? And Blanca. Thank you so much, everyone. Appreciate you and have a great rest of your night.
Bye. Good night.